Welcome to Behind the Fence with Blake Thomas. Presented by Vinyl Fence Warehouse, the podcast where we talk to fence contractors about their journey in the fencing industry. So latch the gate and get ready, because we're about to dive deep into the world of fencing.
Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, I'm Blake at Vinyl Fence Warehouse, and welcome to the Behind the Fence podcast. Today we have my good old friend here, Jared Kessler with Red Dirt Staining Inc., or LLC, out of Edmond, Oklahoma. Jared, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Well, Blake, thanks for having me on. Never done anything like this before, so I'm kind of looking forward to it. But like I said, my name's Jared. I own Red Dirt Staining out of Edmond. I've been in business since 2014, and I live in Edmond. I've got a wife and two girls. I work full-time as a firefighter and stain fences on my days off to stay busy.
Very cool. Now, firefighting, that's we were just talking about, how there are a lot of guys kind of like you, where you've got a firefighting position, and then with your off time, you need something to keep you busy, like you said. So there are a lot that have kind of picked up the fencing trade. What made you think, to get into staining fences on the side?
Well, I got into it, honestly. So I lived in Arkansas for a few years and worked at a fire department out there. And one of the guys I worked with, he did some painting and some staining of like decks. And there's a lot of decks in Northwest Arkansas. So I got in helping him on our days off. And once we decided to move back to Oklahoma, when I graduated from the fire academy, kind of just started looking for something to do on my day off. I didn't really want to go really work for anybody else. I kind of wanted to have the flexibility of setting my hours and just I wanted to start a business, and that just seemed like the natural progression of things was to get into the fencing industry. I didn't really have any desire to build fence. I mean, we've known each other for a long time. I've built vinyl fence with you in high school during the summer for Iron Tough.
Jared here, we go back a long way. We graduated in 2005. Jared worked a couple summers with me, so he knows his way around a fence installation site. So yeah, man, you just kind of picked up, from knowing a little bit about fencing, got into staining.
Yeah, and like working with him, kind of got to learn a little bit of the staining and painting kind of side of things. And I enjoyed it. A little bit less startup cost, I would think, for doing the painting and staining versus the installation side.
Yeah, I can totally see how that would take a lot less starting capital. What's some of the equipment that you kind of use and got started?
So starting out, just the cheap and easy way is an airless sprayer and a backpack sprayer and some miscellaneous supplies, like obviously your product, plastic, tape, things like that are just the bare minimum, and then it progresses from there.
Well, tell us about the setup you have now. I mean, you told me you have basically a whole trailer setup now, right?
Yeah, so I started out with just an airless and a backpack sprayer for cleaning fences with either like oxalic acid or like a bleach solution. But then I've grown and invested some money into a trailer mounted system. It's a gas powered staining rig. It holds 50 gallons of stain in the tank, and it's got a 300-foot reel. So you're not reliant on electricity as long as you can have access to the fence. You can stain, and it speeds things up. It puts out a whole lot more volume than an airless does.
No doubt there, no doubt. Now, what is 50 gallons? How long do you think that lasts you?
It'll probably do, several hundred feet of fence. So the coverage rate for the stain that I use is about 120 to 150 square feet per gallon.
And what's your go-to brand on the stain?
I've been using Wood Defender pretty much since I started. I've used another couple brands, like I've used Ready Seal, but I've always kind of gone back to Wood Defender. I like the people at Wood Defender. I've gotten to know their rep, Roy Branch, pretty well, and he was a huge help when I first started out staining, just answering questions on coverage rate and recommendations on colors. And I actually went down to their plant, Standard Paints plant in Texas, and they have a class they put on over a weekend on kind of a introduction to fence staining, kind of how to market your business. And they teach you a lot about the product. You get to tour their plant. So that gave me a lot of information that I could tell the customer on why that product is superior to something that you might find somewhere else, like at some of the big box stores.
We really find that that's kind of our biggest competition and hurdle is the education for a lot of people. Everybody always thinks that, what is at those big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot, that's just as good as anything else, when really and truly those are somewhat inferior grade products to meet a certain price point for customers. There are, professional grade products out there, that you're going to get a lot more life out of and basically bang for your buck, especially whenever you go with somebody that knows what they're doing, as far as the application. So professional staining, I mean, it's always a great, addition, to any kind of wood fence, especially using professional products like Wood Defender. Definitely shout out to Wood Defender. They do a lot of education, like I said, as far as getting, making you able to inform your customer so that they can make a correct choice.
Yeah.
Wood Defender, I know that they're heavily involved with the American Fence Association. And again, with them, is education and educating your customer are key. So, the fact that you went with somebody that offers that, that's really good.
Yeah, and I've found that
partnering with somebody is usually the best way to go.
And that goes a long way and it sells you if you're able to talk to the customer and you can show that you're knowledgeable about the product you're applying. And I don't have anything against any of the products that some of the big box stores offer. But I definitely try to educate the customer on what are the benefits of this one, of Wood Defender over maybe something you could buy at Lowe's or Home Depot.
Very good. Very good. Now, you've been doing this for how long?
So I started red dirt staining in 2014.
Okay. So red dirt staining, how'd you land on that name?
Honestly, I mean,
was that the first thought, or is that just the one that?
No,
really
I had a few other names in mind. And I just kind of wrote them down on paper and talked with friends and family. And I just kind of said, I'm born and raised in Oklahoma, and this is home. And if anybody that's ever lived in Oklahoma for any length of time knows that our dirt gets on everything. And especially as a fence installer, those guys that install fence, they know it's a pain to dig, but everybody can recognize red dirt. Like, this is red dirt country. So, I liked it, and it stuck.
It's definitely fitting, for the state. I can think of a lot of red dirt companies,
from
Oklahoma, and it's a great name to have. If you can incorporate it, it definitely screams Oklahoma.
The problem I've had with that is getting phone calls from, I'll say their name, but there's a septic company that is up north in Edmond, Red Dirt Septic. I've gotten phone calls because somebody will maybe do a quick Google search for red dirt, and I might be the first one that pops up, and they don't see that it says staining instead of septic, and I get a phone call, which that's not super often, but...
Come fix my pipes.
Yeah.
Now, what is your typical per foot or square foot, charge for a stain? If let's just say a new installation, you don't have to clean anything. You just go out and you just apply the stain.
We're going to be anywhere from 65 to 75 cents a square foot.
Okay. Now, is that just one, like, per side?
Yeah. So we'll obviously calculate the square footage so linear feet times 6 if it's a 6-foot fence. If it's got a top cap, we typically will calculate 6.5 feet for that, just to account for that top cap. And then that's both sides. So whatever the square footage is for one side, we'll just double it if they want both sides of their fence stained.
Is that pretty common where people are doing both sides?
I always recommend staining both sides. That's going to give you the maximum amount of protection.
Nice penetration.
Yeah, and I have customers that they're not going to be in their house very long, and they just want to do it for aesthetics. And as long as they have the understanding that there's going to be some bleed through to the other side, and they're communicating with their neighbors, I haven't had any issues. I don't have any problem staining just one side. If that's what the customer wants, we'll do it. But I'm always going to recommend staining both sides, because that's going to afford you the maximum amount of protection if you stain both sides.
Now, are you finding, that you'll stain one house and you're pretty quickly getting a call from the neighbor? Or are you seeing some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll get people stopping and asking questions while I'm on a job site, and I'll go do an estimate before I'm done for the day. That's happened. I can't tell you how many times.
Now, is your estimate just as simple as, laying out a tape measure, or are you just kind of counting panels, doing something quick
I just measure with a wheel.
Yeah. Something super quick.
Yep.
And just multiply per foot.
Yep.
Times the height, right?
Yep. And I'll usually get their email and send them an estimate that evening.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, what's the best selling color that you stain with?
Cedar tone. I'd probably sell, I would say 7 out of 10 fences are going to be done in cedar tone.
Now, are you only staining mostly cedar fences, or are you staining any pine as well? Like, does anybody ever go and get their pine stained for a little bit more longevity?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do some pine, but I would say most of the fence builders around here, they're building cedar fence. It's the primary product, I would say, here in Oklahoma that I see.
Well, what's your typical lead time right now? About coming into spring. How long does it take you to get out to a stain job?
So this time of year, it's a couple of weeks. And there's always a few days in there where sometimes you can get to it sooner. Weather's my biggest contender.
I was going to say incoming rains are probably going to be your biggest.
Yeah, and even those like the last few mornings where it's been really foggy, like you can't stain that day. Even if it's later in the afternoon, I mean, the wood's a sponge. It's going to soak up all that moisture. I like the moisture content of the wood to be obviously as low as possible, but like 15, 16% is where I'm okay with it. Anything over that, you're kind of throwing money away. You're not doing the customer a good service by staining it with the moisture content any higher than that. It's just not going to last.
Now, is that something that you kind of just figured out by doing it, or is that, what, Dirt Defender kind of recommends with their stain, or is that pretty well just industry standard practice?
I would say for the most part, that's kind of the industry standard. I mean, I know Wood Defender, they always recommend always the lowest moisture content in the wood as possible. That's going to allow the wood to soak up as much stain as possible. But 15, 16% I think is kind of their number. You try to shoot for anything that or less.
I guess you're just using a moisture meter for any wood.
Yep.
Very cool. Pretty simple then. Well, let's switch gears a little bit here.
Okay.
How's business compared to last season?
It's hard to tell right now, but compared to, I'd say things are probably a little bit uptick in business. I've landed a couple bigger jobs earlier in the season than I maybe would have last year, but I don't know if that's
not more jobs, just bigger ones.
Yeah, I don't know. The volume I haven't seen a huge uptick in volume. Maybe a couple extra phone calls in the last couple of weeks, but it's still pretty early in the year. March is really when things start to pick up.
Now, what would you say sets you apart as a stain company?
My attention to detail. I work for myself. I don't have a crew. I'm the owner operator. So I've got a little bit more invested in that product than maybe another staining company who has a crew out there working for them. My goal is to leave the house cleaner than when I got there. So try to pay attention, just those little details of staining the inside edges of like a gate, or making sure that top cap gets thoroughly stained. Things like that.
Just making sure everything's, all the T's are crossed and lowercase J's are dotted.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, how do you actually market yourself and your company?
My primary means of marketing is really just like Facebook, Instagram, and word of mouth.
Just good social media and good personal rapport?
I wouldn't say my social media is very good.
Well, there's always room for improvement in everything that we do. So
yeah, I need to do a better job of marketing my company and taking more photos and making sure I get those posts done. And there's always those days where you've been out for 8 or 10 hours and you get done staining and you're just ready to pack up and get cleaned up and go home. And
yeah. Now, again, you being a firefighter, having your 24-hour shifts and everything for days in a row, I'm sure that, I think we talked about at lunch, you're pretty well done, sometimes after a couple of days of that. So
yeah, depending on how your shift goes, you may be up all night and then you've got work lined up for the next day. So having to either call the customer and just let them know, hey, I'm still coming today. I may be there at noon instead of first thing in the morning, just so I can catch a couple hours of sleep and then maybe work a little bit later into the evening to get that job done.
So definitely some flexibility. It's always good to have in a business that you own.
Yeah, it helps.
Now, who would you say is your ideal customer?
My ideal customer is probably the one that understands the value of what they're getting. Like, staining is not cheap. It's especially when you're paying $30+ a linear foot to have a fence installed, and then you're having to pay an extra $2 to $3 a linear foot, if however the math works out, for their fence to have it stained. Like, it's a pretty big expense because I mean, fences have gotten expensive and they're not getting any cheaper. But the customer that understands the value of having that fence protected, because it's an investment.
Sure.
And like I said, they're not cheap. So the one that understands, like, hey, this is gonna possibly save me money down the road. As long as I keep that fence stained and maintained, it's going to increase the longevity of that fence.
Now, do you ever offer any sales, discounts, or specials during the year?
Not typically. Like, I don't run any like wintertime sales or anything like that, but we do offer discounts for military, first responders, educators, nurses, things like that.
Now, have you ever collaborated or worked together with other fence companies on some projects?
Yeah, I've stained for a lot of fence companies here in the metro. I've done work for some like businesses and things like that. Not really. I wouldn't say I've collaborated on any like major projects, but I mean I've done work for a lot of fence companies here in the metro.
Then you would also mention pergolas. Is that something you're still doing much of, or?
I still stain pergolas, yeah. So I was doing pergolas for a builder here in the city where I would pre-stain everything and then for him, and he would come either pick it up or I would deliver it to the job site. But we're no longer offering that. Just my main focus here in the last couple of years has just been fences. That's kind of my bread and butter. But we'll still do we'll just still do pergolas, the occasional play set, things like that.
Now, are you still at the point where you're offering your services to fence companies to come in and stain for them, once the fence is complete, or?
Yeah, I'm always willing to work with fence companies. I like working with fence companies, and they're a good resource to have, especially like in the wintertime when maybe your everyday customer that wants their fence restained isn't really thinking about doing that project. Fence companies are still out there building year round, and that's always a good relationship to have with local fence builders. To if they need a fence stained or they have a customer that they just finished a job and they need it stained, because weather is, like I said, my biggest contender. But it doesn't matter if it's 110 degrees or if it's 30 degrees. I can still stain as long as the wood's not wet.
Right. Now, speaking of that, what do you try to do to keep yourself busy through the winter?
Really, I enjoy my time off in the wintertime. So I'm in a good position where I try not to rely on this income, since I do work full time as a firefighter. This is not my main source of income. Just because it's my day off job doesn't mean I don't take it serious, but I also value my time with my family. So
amen.
That time in the wintertime is when I try to take a step back, get things ready for, obviously tax season's here now. So get all that stuff put together and maybe take a vacation with my wife and kids.
If you could look back at yourself when you were first starting, what would you do differently? What would you tell yourself? Hey, don't do this. Or hey, do this instead. Or
so I had to learn the hard way that communication was kind of it's huge in running a business. Just the communication with customers and things like that, where one customer may take it for granted, or you may think that they understand that, hey, the weather's crappy is why I'm not out staining a fence. It doesn't take any time to shoot that customer an email to save yourself a phone call asking, why aren't you here? Probably another thing would be not being afraid to grow, like maybe doing things a little bit different up front and growing my business to where, and that's where my plan for the future is to grow where I can take a step back from actually staining the fences and just focus on the business side of everything. And that's, I think with any business, like if you're trying to do it and run it, you're not going to have a ton of success.
Yeah, I think the saying is you've got to work on the business and not at the business.
Yeah.
In the business.
Yeah.
We still all struggle with that. I mean, I'm still pulling orders half the time. We'll get there eventually.
Yeah. And I don't mind doing it because I do enjoy it. Like it is a little cathartic sometimes to throw some headphones in and just go stain a fence. But yeah, I'd probably gear myself more towards running the business side of it instead of just doing it, instead of waiting 11 years later to do that.
What's the one tool on the job site that you couldn't live without? Obviously, any of them, but if you
Well,
one
I mean,
that's like that's my favorite piece.
I'm not going to give you the cookie cut. Oh, my sprayer, like that's kind of a given. I would say a car cover.
So you've got a lot of overspray, right? So you come in and you'll mask off around the house and anything that's kind of in the way.
We don't mask off a whole lot, so I'll spray up to about 3 or 4 feet from the house and then cut in by hand. Now, obviously, there's those situations where you're doing a like straight black stain up against a white stucco house. I'm going to mask some stuff off.
Yeah.
And I mean, Oklahoma's always windy, like for the most part. Like about 15 miles per hour wind is where anything over that, we're not going to stain, which is a lot of days.
Now, just so you can kind of put maybe, a customer's mind at ease, how hard is this stuff to get off of your house or your car?
It's not hard.
So if you get a little overspray, it's not a huge deal. It's something that you can go out there and clean. And
no, it's not a huge deal.
Your paint job.
No, it's time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the car cover was a easy investment to just buy a bunch of them, because time is money. And if I don't have to spend 20 or 30 minutes washing a car by hand, then I can just pull that car cover off and leave. Because most of the time, the customer can put their car in the garage or they can move. The one time that I ended up kind of losing my ass on a job was I didn't realize the guy had come home and he was in a matte black Range Rover, had been wrapped with a matte black vinyl wrap. All the pigment came off, but those little oil spots wouldn't come off.
Oh yeah, you could see those.
Fortunately, the guy was cool about it. There was a lot of understanding that I was working on the back side of the fence. He came in, I didn't hear him. I ended up just giving him the fence. I didn't charge him to stain the fence. And he just took what he was going to pay for the fence and had it rewrapped. The wrap was older, but I would have absolutely rewrapped his car if I had to. Like, I'd rather lose money on the job than get a bad review, bad word of mouth. Like,
that speaks miles anyway. You're willing, to do the right thing. It was a mistake, obviously, but
yeah,
just being able to do that and having that mindset.
And I've always
instead of trying to say, well, you shouldn't have parked there.
Yeah, we're all human. Like, we're gonna make mistakes, but just own them. Like, do the right thing.
No, I'm sure he'll return then.
Yeah. And he was actually, I've restained his fence a couple times since then.
Well, good. Well, then it was totally worth it.
Yeah, it was worth it.
Good. Very good investment there. What is the best piece of equipment that is on your stain trailer?
Probably my stain rig. It's a huge time saver.
So I'm guessing it's got the, retractable reels and all that type of stuff, and just a real slick piece of equipment then.
Yeah, and it just puts out so much volume, and that's kind of where Wood Defender is designed to work is, for instance, I'll have a customer, they'll say, well, how many coats of stain are you going to do? It's like, well, I don't, and having to explain to them, I don't do coats. Like, it may take 1, it may take 3. The goal is to completely saturate that picket with stain. So yeah, that staining rig is definitely a huge time saver just because it puts out a lot more volume and you're able to get, so you have a little bit more waste in stain, but the time savings makes it worth it.
What is the best piece of fence advice that you've received?
Best piece of fence advice?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to do with fencing?
Or the fencing business?
Probably don't undercharge, maybe. So when I first started out, like, because I was by myself and still am, I was doing it for cheap. And
I think at one point we all do.
Yeah, and I just wanted jobs, and I had a fencing contractor that I was working for. He was like, you need to charge more. I was like, well, I don't see the value. I didn't see the value in it. And I think with any business owner, like you said, we've kind of all done it, but you want jobs. Well, if I could do 7 jobs and make X amount of dollars, whereas before I was having to do 10, and I'm still at a price point that is at market value for my industry, then I'm still providing the customer a good value because I'm not over what the market value is and I'm not way under. and you're still able to reinvest. You're able to reinvest a little bit more into your business to make you more efficient to in the future maybe keep your prices from having to go up.
Yeah, we're actually really having to deal with that right now. With all the major tariffs that we're getting hit with, materials are going to start to increase. So, the only thing that we've ever really been able to do anytime we've had that kind of increase over the years is just become more efficient.
Yeah.
So, the equipment, that's definitely the biggest thing, in staying efficient. Just always keeping up on best practices. Do you have anything planned for 2025 as far as, furthering your fencing education or, offering more services or anything like that?
I'll probably offer maybe it's like, I mean, I've always offered to the customer, like if they're more of a DIYer, I don't have a problem selling them the stain at my cost, maybe mark it up a little bit if I'm going to pick it up and deliver it to them and giving them some instruction. Money is not my motivator in this. Obviously I have to make money to stay in business, but I want to stay busy and I want to provide a service to everybody out there that is a good value. And man, I get it. Things are expensive. So if there's somebody that I go and do a quote for and they see the number and they're like, man, I can't afford that. We're just going to have to do it ourselves. I'm always going to offer like, hey, I'll sell you the stain because I can probably get it for them cheaper than they go buy it at a big box store. And if they have questions, I'm happy to answer them and give them some tips and tricks or whatever.
Well, just like you often replace the wrap for that, your customer. I mean, offering your potential customers something, whether you're actually making money at that situation or not, but you're at least, giving them a good product.
Yeah.
And they know that that's the product, that a professional is using. And then, 5 years down the later, when it comes time to restain, they may be able to afford it.
Yeah. And that is a good point that you bring up. And I could get into detail about all the differences in stain, but if they use a wood defender whenever it comes time to restain, it is much more cost effective to use that product than if I were to try to stain over something from Lowe's or Home Depot. It's just a difference in product and how they're applied and like how they wear. I don't know if you've seen in your time tearing out fences or whatever, that maybe a fence that's been stained, where a lot of those stains from the big box store, they peel off the fence. It's almost like just like a waxy layer on the outside.
You can kind of see that.
It peels off.
Whereas like skin that comes off the pig.
Yeah, wood defender doesn't do that. It slowly fades over time.
And that's the thing with anything. Us being a lifetime type fence company, I always tell people, hey, this is a product that you're not actually going to have to replace, but just like anything, it's going to fade. Every single vehicle ever made, if it's left outside, it's going to fade.
Yeah.
The whole point to any type of outdoor product is that it fades uniformly and evenly.
Yeah.
That you don't just have one panel or, a couple pickets that are just, like missing teeth in something.
Yeah.
That way it all has a nice, uniform, good look to it.
And that's where Wood Defender pays dividends, especially for those DIY customers. It's self-leveling. You don't get those, if a lot of people are going to use a roller or maybe one of those little Wagner power sprayers that they never spray evenly, whereas you could get away with using a Wood Defender or one of those with like Wood Defender stain. It'll self-level as long as you're putting enough stain on the fence. It'll self-level. Whereas if some of the other stains, like you could see lines and they don't give a good finish.
It's a lot smoother application then.
Yeah. So I try to educate the customer on things like that.
I would love to say,
if they see an estimate and they're just like, man, I can't afford just keep running the fence staining business. So that's, I mean,
it's a lot of years ahead though, isn't it?
Money is not my motivator. Obviously,
it's not on the forefront of my mind, but
it's in the
to be able to
not too distant future. Grow the company,
Jared,
grow the business.
Again, with
and keep up
Jared
with
Kessler with
inflation,
Red Dirt Staining
unfortunately. But just
LLC,
providing the
out of
customer
Edmond,
good
Oklahoma.
value
Jared, how can
some education.
potential customers get a hold of you? See yourself having services? 2, 3, 4 spray rigs?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in the
Well, like we
future.
were talking about as a fireman, you'll have a pretty early retirement, which is sweet.
Yeah.
So I believe that you're probably going to have a lot of years left to get into something. So
Yeah, and I think this is fences aren't going anywhere, at least not in my lifetime, I wouldn't think. And everybody's got a fence as a potential customer, so there's obviously a market for the business. You can look me up on Facebook at Red Dirt Staining. I'm on Instagram. or just a quick Google search of Red Dirt Staining LLC. If
Shout.
anybody wants to get a hold of me, my number is 405-693-9393. You can also, my website has some contact info. It's reddirtstaining.com.
Very cool. Jared, again, thank you so much for stopping by the Behind the Fence podcast today.
I've enjoyed it.
We hope that we've been informative and maybe give some insight into anybody out there looking for stain. It
was good.
Or maybe even looking to offer stain as a service.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. It wasn't as awkward as I thought it was going to be, so
Well,
I appreciate
good.
it.
I think we bulldozed through it, and man, hopefully you can make it to your daughter's appointment.
I will. Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Good to see you, man. Thanks
You
for
too.
stopping by.